The brutal murder of 42-year-old Elena Marlowe shattered the quiet predictability of Wrenfield Court. What neighbors first whispered about as a tragic accident at the end of a cul-de-sac quickly unraveled into a darker story. An illicit affair across a fence line, a secret kept for safety rather than deception, and a 19-year-old neighbor whose obsession curdled into ownership. At the center of it all, a housewife who had rebuilt her life years earlier, and a boy who mistook desire for permission. It began, as these things often do, in the space between errands and routines. On a warm April evening, Elena stood at her sink rinsing strawberries, while the local news murmured in the living room, and her husband, Daniel, scrolled through emails he never quite finished. Their marriage had settled into the polite choreography of long companionship, shared calendars, 2 cars, parallel exhaustion. They loved each other in the way people learn to love through habit. What Elena missed, after 13 years and 2 moves, was being seen. Across the hedge, the Turners' garage door stuttered and opened. Kyle stepped out, tall in the loose-jointed way of late adolescence, baseball cap backward, a coil of extension cord slung over one shoulder. He had grown up 2 doors down, and then somehow, in a single summer, become a young man with forearms tanned from a landscaping job and a laugh that made girls on the block look up. Elena had known him as a kid who knocked at Halloween with a plastic pirate sword and called her Mrs. M. Now he called her Elena without thinking twice. Their first real conversation that spring lasted 3 minutes and rearranged nothing. An offer to fix a sagging fence slat, a joke about squirrels plotting a coup in her bird feeder, the easy kindness teenagers sometimes carry when they haven't learned to hide it. She handed him a glass of water. He handed her back a smile that stayed longer than it should have. When the fence was straight and the glass rinsed, both returned to their evenings, but something unlooked for had shifted a degree. Days found new edges. Kyle waved when he jogged past and slowed when she waved back. He brought the Marlowe's trash cans in without being asked, then pretended he'd done it because he happened to be there. Elena baked a pan of lemon bars for his mom and carried them over, even though she wasn't the kind of neighbor who baked. She told Daniel that Kyle was helping with yard work for cash, the way kids do in summer. Daniel nodded and Venmo'd $50 with a thumbs-up emoji. What Elena did not say, not then and not for weeks, was that she had told Kyle a story she didn't tell most people. Not because she owed anyone silence, but because privacy had been the only thing that kept her safe when she was young. Years earlier, before Wrenfield Court and PTA meetings and the Marlowe's beige couch, Elena had transitioned. She had come out to Daniel while they were still 2 friends in a bookshop who shared a taste for memoirs and bad coffee. He loved her then and married her later with his eyes open. The only secret left in their life is the one you never get to stop protecting, the right to be yourself without earning it over and over again. She did not plan to tell Kyle anything. He was a neighbor kid who became a neighbor almost man, someone she treated with a motherly patience that surprised her. The trouble was not her history. The trouble was how loneliness can misread attention. It happened on a Sunday afternoon carved out of ordinary. Elena sent a text to Kyle about the front shrubs, the ones that always went leggy too fast, and he came by with clippers and the kind of confidence that makes a project seem like a good idea. They worked side by side, sunlight stippling their arms, the air smelling like cut leaves and hose water. When they were done, they stood with hands on hips and admired the clean line. He said, "Looks good, right?" and looked at her for approval, like approval from her mattered. He stayed for iced tea at the patio table. They talked about nothing. Bike lanes, a new taco place, the wind that came up from the lake in the afternoon, until nothing became the thing neither of them wanted to leave. He was 19 and hungry to be invited into an adult world. She was 42 and starved for someone to ask about the book she was reading and actually wait for the answer. When he stood to go, he hesitated the way you hesitate before you step into cold water. "Thanks for, he said, and left the sentence without an ending. The first text that crossed a line came 2 nights later. "You ever feel like you're living somebody else's plan for you?" Elena stared at it too long. She typed back a safe answer about college majors and family expectations and erased it, then wrote, "Sometimes." Then, because truth without context can feel like a dare, she added, "It gets better when you decide what you can live with and what you can't." He wrote, "You always know what to say." She muted the thread and told herself phones were just phones. Summer knitted itself from small risks. Kyle started timing his runs to pass her house when she watered flowers. He learned the way she liked her coffee. Milk first, then pour. 2 slow stirs, and brought a cup on Saturday mornings like a boy with a peace offering. Elena told herself she was mothering a kid who needed direction. She told herself that because believing anything else felt like betrayal in a language she didn't want to speak. The kiss, when it finally happened, didn't feel like a choice until after. A thunderstorm cracked open an evening in June. Power went out on half the block, and rain hit the patio roof with a sound like applause. Kyle texted from his porch, "You okay?" She replied that candles make everything look holy. He sent a laughing emoji, and then, "I'm coming over to check the breaker on your porch." She should have said no. She didn't. He came in damp around the edges, hair pushed back, the smell of wet asphalt clinging to him. They checked the breaker and found nothing wrong. They stood too close at the back door, watching rain make rivers of the walkway. Elena said, "You should go before it gets worse." He turned and said, "I don't want to." And if she had thought of herself as the adult in the room, she did not, in that moment, act like one. He kissed her, as if he were finally answering the question he had been asking silently for weeks. It was tentative first, then not tentative at all. And when she realized what was happening, it was already happening. She pulled back, breath in her throat. "Kyle, we can't," he said. "We already did," and smiled a smile that mistook sweetness for victory. After, when the storm thinned and the house hummed back to life, Elena's hands shook. Kyle stood barefoot in her kitchen, eating strawberries from the bowl like a scene he planned to remember. "Tomorrow?" he asked. She said nothing. He kissed her cheek and slipped out the sliding door into a night that smelled washed and new. The morning after any wrong thing is the same, an inventory of what can be undone and what cannot. Elena made coffee and packed Daniel's lunch and forced herself to say, "Have a good one," like her voice was built for casual goodbyes. Then she stood at the sink and looked at the fence slat he had mended and knew that fences do the opposite of what they promise. Affairs teach their own curriculum: secrecy, the logistics of absence, the physics of distance and pull. A week later, Elena stopped correcting Kyle when he texted late. 2 weeks later, she learned to delete messages hard and fast. By July, she had rules: no weekend nights, no photos. And he nodded like a good student and broke them anyway. He was 19, which is to say, he had a beautiful confidence in his own gravity. He wanted what he wanted and believed the world would either hand it to him or be failing a test. He began to ask for more time, more answers, more pieces of her day. "Tell him you're volunteering," he said, when she said she couldn't meet. "Tell him you're tired." He started to appear without asking. A shadow beyond the hedge when Daniel grilled steaks. A car idling at the corner when she drove home from the grocery store. Possessiveness arrived disguised as devotion. Jealousy lives in the pockets of young men who have never learned the weight of their hands. He glared when she mentioned lunch with a friend. He scrolled her Instagram and demanded explanations for old photos. "Why'd you never post your wedding?" he asked. She said, "Because I don't perform my life for people I don't know." And he laughed like she'd dodged something clever. On an afternoon in late July, Kyle stood in her kitchen eating cereal from a mug, bare feet tapping the tile. He looked around with the curiosity of someone visiting a museum after hours. He opened a cabinet searching for cinnamon and found, behind the Advil and the measuring cups, a white pharmacy bag with a label that carried her name. He wasn't supposed to open it. He did. He read silently at first and then aloud, as if reading could make understanding happen faster. Estradiol, spironolactone. He knew the words from a meme he shouldn't have laughed at, and from a health class that mentioned hormones. With a shrug. He felt the room change shape, even though the room had not changed at all. Elena took the pharmacy bag from his hand, folded the top, and placed it on the counter with care. She had imagined telling him, if she ever told him, in a moment made gentle by trust. Not because she owed him information, but because intimacy without context can make truth feel like a trick. She had not imagined this. A bottle in his palm, a look that went from curiosity to calculation, and then to something else she did not recognize. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kyle asked, the words tight. He stepped back and then forward like he didn't know which way to go. Were you going to let me keep not knowing?" He looked at her body, and then away, as if not looking could make it less his business. "You should have said." Elena set her shoulders and refused the shame offered to her. "I didn't owe you that," she said, plain. "I don't owe you my history to be real. I would have told you if this was ever going to be more than a mistake we kept making." He held on to the word, mistake, like it was a weapon. "So, I'm the mistake," he said, voice pitching higher, in a way that made him sound briefly like the boy he still was. "You did this. You wanted this. You..." He stopped. He looked at the door, then at her, then at the door again. He left without slamming it, which somehow felt worse. The messages that followed tilted hard. "You lied to me. How could you not tell me who you are? Answer me." Elena typed and erased 15 replies. "You are not entitled to me" would have been the truest. "I am not a confession" would have been the strongest. She sent nothing. Silence is a kind of boundary. Kyle's hurt metastasized into certainty. He told himself he had been tricked. He told himself he was owed the fantasy he had built. He told himself a story where humiliation gets a solution. Boys learn that somewhere. They learn it too easily and unlearn it too late. 2 days passed. Elena stayed away from her patio and watered plants in the morning. Daniel noticed the way she flinched when the dog barked at the back fence and asked, "Everything okay?" She said she was tired. He kissed the top of her head and said, "Let's get out of town for a weekend in August." And the promise of any future, however small, felt like grace. The third night at 9:22, Elena heard a tap at the sliding door. Kyle stood 3 feet beyond the glass, hands up, palms open, a picture of harmlessness. She should have called the police. She opened the door instead because, sometimes, kindness is a reflex older than fear. "We need to talk," he said. He was steady, voice low. "I said things. I didn't mean them." He looked past her toward the hallway, toward Daniel's office with the light on under the door. "Can we go somewhere? We won't be heard?" They stepped into the garage because garages are where people go when the house cannot host a conversation. The concrete held the day's heat. Garden tools hung in a neat row like punctuation marks. Kyle kept his distance for 30 seconds that mattered. Then he closed it, like distance offended him. "You should have told me," he said, "from the start. You owed me that." Elena shook her head. "No," she said, firm. "I owe you honesty about whether I want to see you again. I don't. That's all." The shape of his face shifted. Anger lit the edges. You made me feel like I was crazy, he said. Like I was making it up, like I wasn't enough of a man to see it. You made me into a joke. She took a breath and chose measured words. You are not a joke, she said. You are a young man who needs to leave my house and not come back. The line he crossed next was the kind you can write down later and still not understand how it got crossed. He put a hand on her arm, not hard, but not asking. She stepped back. He stepped forward. Tell me it didn't mean anything, he demanded. Tell me you didn't use me for… He bit the end off the sentence because even he didn't like how it sounded. You owe me something. I don't, she said, and for that he would punish her. In the kitchen, 10 minutes later, the argument arrived like weather. Elena moved there because the garage felt like a trap. She wanted an exit. She wanted light. She wanted the dog to bark if she needed someone to come. Lower your voice, she hissed, glancing toward the hall. You need to leave. He followed, eyes bright with the mean confidence of someone discovering how loud a whisper can be. Say it, he pressed. Say you hid it. Say you kept it from me on purpose. She reached for her phone on the counter, and he reached for it first. The phone hit tile and spidered. The sound brought Daniel's chair scrape and a shadow in the hall. Everything okay? Daniel called, too casual. Elena said, yes, too quickly. She put a hand up at Kyle the way you put a hand up to stop a car. He didn't stop. He grabbed her wrist when she reached for the phone again, fingers around bone. It was quick and clumsy, the kind of grip that says more about panic than force. He meant to hold her in place. She jerked free and knocked the knife block with her elbow. Something heavy clattered to the counter, and then to the floor. Daniel stepped into the kitchen. He took in Elena, the knife on tile, the neighbor boy breathing hard. Kyle, he said, like a man whose mouth was suddenly filled with pennies. What are you doing in our house? The next 5 seconds were the kind people replay later, and each time the angles change. Kyle moved first, not at Daniel, and not exactly at Elena, but toward the edge where all three converged. Elena bent to pick up the knife, not to use it, but to remove it from the equation. Kyle got there first. He snatched it because snatching makes you feel decisive. Daniel grabbed Kyle's shoulder, because grabbing can slow things down, and sometimes it does. Kyle twisted, startled, and in the twist, the knife found soft place. The sound that followed was not a scream. It was a shocked exhale, and then the empty thud of a body finding the floor. For one terrible half-second, everyone stood in a frame with no motion. Then blood bloomed against Elena's blouse in a shape her brain refused to name. Daniel moved. He pressed his hands where pressure helps. He said her name like a command. Elena's mouth formed a word he couldn't hear. Kyle stood statue still, knife in his hand, eyes too wide. I didn't mean, he began, and even he heard how worthless that was. The dog barked. A neighbor's porch light clicked on. Daniel shouted for 911, and Kyle dropped the knife to the tile, where it skittered under the toe kick like a creature escaping. He backed toward the sliding glass door, with his hands up and his breath high and thin. I didn't mean, he said again. And then he was gone, running into a night that no longer belonged to him. Paramedics arrived in blue and white and function, the kitchen filled with the quiet brutality of saving. Elena's pulse fought and then fluttered. Hands lifted, voices counted. Gauze went red too fast. Daniel rode in the front of the ambulance because the back was crowded with expertise. He tried to call her mother and could not remember the unlock code on his phone. Neighbors watched from porches in robes and hoodies, coffee cooling in mugs they had not yet washed. Sirens made everything feel like television until the stretcher rolled out, and it wasn't. Elena Marlowe was pronounced dead at Mercy General 40 minutes after she left her kitchen. The official line would record it tidy. Sharp force trauma with rapid blood. The unofficial line, the one people say in kitchens, was shorter and messier. A boy killed her. Detective Valerie Ortiz took the case out of turn because she didn't like what it might become. Whispers, rationalizations, a story bent to make a woman responsible for the rage of a young man. She began with the room itself, because rooms tell the truth when mouths cannot. No forced entry. Cabinet still open where someone had looked for nothing. A note on the counter that read, in Elena's neat hand, "Pasta for tomorrow. Remind Daniel a oil change." The phone on the floor lit with a missed call from a number saved as Mom. They found Kyle 6 hours later in the Turner garage, sitting on the cement in yesterday's clothes, hands washed too clean. He didn't run again. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He said, "It was an accident." And Detective Ortiz said, "We'll get to that." The forensic map colored in the gaps with facts that didn't know how to lie. Smears on the pantry door that matched Kyle's height. A partial shoe print in a spilled arc from the sink to the door. Elena's blood on the cuff of Kyle's sweatshirt. Not just spatter, but transfer. Texts pulled from a phone Kyle didn't have time to wipe. Messages that begged for answers, and then demanded them. "You owe me. You don't get to make me into a fool." Voice memos he sent to himself practicing lines. "You should have told me," repeated in 3 different inflections. In interview, when the adrenaline broke and the story had to hold its own weight. Kyle tried to make fear into sympathy. "She lied to me," he said, and Detective Ortiz's face did not move. "She didn't lie," Ortiz said. "She didn't tell you something you weren't entitled to. That's not the same. Tell me about the knife." He said he didn't mean to grab it. "You meant to grab something," she said. "You picked the thing within reach." The panic defense arrived on time, as it always does when men are handed the chance to convert shame into explanation. His first lawyer floated it in soft phrasing at arraignment. A young man confronted with information he was not prepared to process. A moment of shock, a tragic spiral. The judge's eyebrows went up a millimeter. The prosecutor's expression did not change at all. The court would not dignify bigotry with excuse. You don't get to turn a woman's existence into your alibi. Daniel testified quietly at the preliminary hearing, and broke only once, not when he talked about blood or the ambulance or the months without sleep, but when he said, "She made our house a place where the UPS guy knew he was going to be offered water on a hot day." Grief is sometimes practical in its detail. Trial opened 5 months later in a courtroom that smelled faintly of lemon polish and nerves. The gallery filled with people who loved Elena, and people who knew people like Elena, and people who had learned, painfully, how stories get told about them when they are not in the room to tell their own. The jury looked like a county, a teacher, a landscaper, a retiree with reading glasses on a chain, a nursing student, a delivery driver, a dad who took notes as if noting down every detail could save someone next time. The state built a case with blocks set one on the next. They began with the neighbors who placed Kyle at the house twice that week. They introduced the estradiol bottle clinically and refused to let it be spectacle. "It is a prescription like any other," the prosecutor said simply, and moved on. They played Kyle's texts, not the ugliest ones, because there were none with slurs, but the insistent ones that pulled a line wrong. They walked the jury through the kitchen, the phone, the knife block, the toe kick. They put Detective Ortiz on the stand and let her do what she does, translate movement into motive. "He came to force a conversation," she said. When he couldn't control her response, he tried to control the room. The defense tried smaller narratives on for size. Mutual struggle, they said. No intent, they suggested that Elena's failure to disclose something about herself created a volatile situation, as if a woman's safety is the price of someone else's discomfort. The jurors' faces did not suggest sympathy for that framing. You could feel the room harden around the word disclose like a shell. Daniel sat through every word that used his wife's life like a chess piece. When the defense attorney asked if Elena had ever told him about the affair, he said, "No," and looked at his hands, as if he could hold the answer there. When asked directly if he knew Elena's history, he said, "From the day we fell in love," and a muscle moved in his jaw. It wasn't a secret in our marriage. It was none of anyone else's business. Elena's friend from book club testified with her hair shaking and her hands still. She was proud of her life, the friend said. She carried enough in the past. She didn't perform it for people who hadn't earned it. Pride is a word that can be swung like a banner or whispered like a prayer. Here, it felt like an anchor. The verdict came on a Thursday with thunder massing behind the courthouse, as if the weather understood theater. Guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty of burglary for entering without consent. Guilty of tampering for wiping the knife clean enough to look like he hadn't, and hiding it where he thought no one would think to look. The judge sentenced Kyle Walker to 27 years with parole possible only after the sort of time that changes the bones of a person. She declined, pointedly, to entertain arguments cloaked as panic. "Other people's identities are not emergencies," she said. And the gavel sounded like a door closing on a bad era. There were no victors in that room, only people with different kinds of loss. Daniel walked into sunlight that didn't feel the same on his skin. The Marlowe house sold that fall to a couple with a toddler who turned the front steps into a chalk museum. The Turners moved 2 towns over because grocery stores can be impossible after a story burns through a street. Wrenfield Court learned to lower its voice for a while. In the months that followed, the neighborhood organized an evening vigil at the pocket park by the duck pond. Someone printed a photo of Elena tucked behind a stack of library books, smiling as if someone had just said something wicked and true. Candles cupped in paper rings flared and guttered and flared again. A teenager from down the block, one who had mowed lawns with Kyle, and who now carried a knot of guilt that didn't belong to him, read a short statement he wrote with his mom. "We are responsible for what we do with the things we feel," he said, eyes on the paper. "We don't get to turn feelings into weapons." People say the lake breeze was kinder that night. Memory loves symbols. What is true is simpler. Daniel went home to a quiet house and put his hand on the back of the sofa, where she used to rest her head after dinner. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He went on. The case file lives now in a drawer labeled by year and jurisdiction, its edges softened by handling. Inside are photographs that deserve to be shut gently, and transcripts full of words that tried to bend fact into permission and failed. There is also a letter Elena's mother wrote to the court, but didn't read, because some grief should not be made to stand under fluorescent lights. "My daughter was not a lesson," it begins. She was a person. Those 7 words belong on a wall. What remains are smaller things that do their work slowly. Neighbors who learn to step in when a bad situation leans toward a worse one. A community that refuses to let anyone's existence be debated as if it were philosophy. A husband who keeps a lemon bar recipe on the fridge because hospitality was her language, and he wants to keep speaking it. The story everyone in Wrenfield Court tells now when they tell it. Right goes like this. 2 people made a mistake, and one person turned it into a claim. He believed he had been owed something and punished the person who would not pay. A knife met a body, and a kitchen keeps record of the day. A house lost its gravity. The rest is dates and docket numbers. The important part is what you do with the space a life leaves behind. Elena Marlowe will not be reduced to the worst 5 minutes of someone else's anger. In photo frames on half a dozen mantels, she still waters a line of stubborn roses and laughs with her mouth open and shows up with a cold bottle of water for the UPS guy in July. In the absence where her voice would have been, Other voices learn to say the thing that most matters when people try to turn identity into story. No one owes you their past to be safe in their present. And nobody gets to rewrite a woman's life around what you couldn't handle. If you walk past the Pocket Park today and stop at the small plaque the city let the neighbors install under the live oak, you'll find words Daniel chose with care. They are not grand. They are somebody's truth set in metal. Be kind when you are curious. Be quiet when you are angry. Be human all the time.